All right, everyone. Welcome to HearThe Students, the impact of COVID-19 on California colleges. We are going to now start. I see we have 93 participants so far with us, so thank you so much for all of you on the call. And I'd like to introduce myself again. Welcome, bienvenidos a todos. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Karina Paredes. I am the Community Outreach Coordinator, a public advocate, a nonprofit racial justice law firm and advocacy organization based out of San Francisco and Sacramento. However, we do statewide work. And we are so pleased to be co-hosting with 5 college student advocacy groups, including the 3 statewide college student associations, the Student Senate for California Community Colleges, the Cal State Student Association, and the University of California Student Association. We're also super fortunate to be joined by Yo Soy / I Am, based in San Joaquin Delta College. It's a student group focused on undocumented student issues and students making a change at City College San Francisco, known for their work to implement AB 705, which is monumental law that reformed remedial education at the community college system. You'll also hear from other student organizations, such as through a chat box we have, or not chat box, Q&A. We'll be trying to answer questions. And we'll also have students from the private colleges and universities give some remarks as well. From her name is Carolyn, and she'll be joining us later. So I'd just like to really thank our student panelists, Amine, Bryan, Gloria, Aidan, and Michael, who are here today during this coronavirus global pandemic. You know, we're all here together now with over 100 participants. And now more than ever, policymakers and advocates need to hear directly from students across the state to inform state segments and colleges' approaches to meeting the moment. As we have been hearing our governor say, we need to meet the moment. And so far, California has been doing a great job at meeting every moment possible. And we just want to continue that as well with our college students. From distance learning to mental health, the issues that were already existing, we want to share this space to show how this pandemic has exacerbated those issues, and also as well elevate other issues that have came up due to the pandemic. Last but not least, we are so grateful to be joined by Dr. Lande Ajose, Senior Policy Advisor to Governor Newsom for Higher Education, and Marlene Garcia, the Executive Director of the California Student Aid Commission. And we'll be hearing from these phenomenal women, our credible higher ed leaders, right after our student panel. And just some housekeeping. As you know, we're now in this Zoom webinar world, and I'd like to ask for folks to be patient with us and bear with us as we navigate through this. We're really ambitious. We wanted, as a group, to have students from each segment and also incredible leaders. So we have a robust agenda, and just be patient with us as we move through this together. Everyone except our panelists and policymakers are muted, and we will be taking questions at the end of the webinar. So please type in that in the Q&A, and my colleagues will be helping lead that by sending me Q&A. And I also want this to feel like a free-flowing dialogue between students and policymakers. So again, please use the Q&A, and we'll be having some polls as well. And finally, without further ado, let's kick it off by understanding who has joined us today. We invited policymakers, segment leaders, researchers, advocates, and of course, students. So who do we have in the virtual audience? So our first poll, just popping up right now. What best represents your identity or affiliation? We have just single choice, so if you can please select one. I can see y'all are answering very rapidly. Almost half of y'all have voted. almost there. 316 participants are on. See if we can get to 100%. As you can see right now, we have 30% or so of advocates. Community college students make up about 9% so far. Other, over 20%. I wonder, I'd like to know who the other identify as. Let's see, almost there. Okay. If we could maybe end the poll soon, it looks like we're seeing around 83% of folks voting. With 30% advocates, you really hear, sounds like relatives and students. Also, others, a huge number of folks, about 18% of policymakers or segment institutional leaders. And then we have about 20% altogether of students with community college students and being at with about 8 being at the front of that. And let's see, I'm gonna end the poll so we can continue. We have a robust group and hopefully more folks join us. As you can see, now it's 121. So now I'm going, so thank you for filling that out. It's great to hear that we have a good number, a kind of mix, not too overwhelming. Shout out to our students for being here. I know you have class and other responsibilities as well during the day. So we really appreciate not only our student panelists, but also students in the audience. Okay, so moving on, I'm now going to jump into our student panel. Oh, sorry, before one more poll, just to get a little bit more of understanding of who else we have on the line. So we want to better understand the identities of students on the line who have joined us today. So this polling is anonymous. Don't answer beyond the level of your comfort right now. Feel free to skip, but we'd like to now know a little bit more about the students on the call. So if you could please just fill out this poll to describe more of your personal background. As you can see, there's more categories we could have included, but we have so far working students, student of color, Pell Grant, college promise grant recipient, Child Grant recipient, first gen, former foster youth, undocumented, and student parent. Just to get a better sense of what students we have on the call. And as you can see, we have about 70% of our students present are students of color. 55% are working students, either full-time, part-time work study. About 40% identify as first generation, and again, multiple choice. So let's see the numbers. It's really intersectional, and first generation financial aid recipient, that really resonates with me, is that's also my background when I was an undergrad. So really thank you for being here and being ready to hear from your own fellow peers and also from policymakers as well. All right, so ending this poll now. That's 24 students answered, so thank you so much. And again, this space is intended with first and foremost having that time for students, that virtual space. From my own personal research, I've seen students voicing out on social media and kind of their concerns, and we just here at Public Advocates and also our co-hosts, we really wanted to cultivate some sort of virtual space where we can have students share their lived experience right now on behalf of their peers, their organization that they represent. So without further ado, we are now going to kick off our student panel with Amine El Moznine, a second-year student at De Anza Community College in Cupertino. Amine is a political science and global issues double major and will be transferring in the fall. He serves as the Vice President of Legislative Affairs for the Student Senate for the California Community Colleges, which represents over 2.1 million community college students and 150 campuses statewide. So, Amine, let me find you on here.
All right. Hey, everybody. And, as always, thank you to Public Advocates for being fantastic friends of our organization and our system. I think more so than many groups, they do a very good job of reaching out and hearing our viewpoints and advocating for us when possible. So to uplift various talking points and priorities for our organization, as well as what we've seen within the community college system, at the state level, the Chancellor's Office has released a variety of guidelines and regulations to individual districts, as well as 3 executive orders that go around withdrawals, student fee refunds, grading policies, as well as in new regulations for EOPS grants and work-study awards. However, the reality of our system is that it's very decentralized, both in practice and politically. So the Chancellor's Office works more as an intermediary. That's a tough job at the best of times, but especially during a time like this, they're doing the best they can. I think district by district, you're seeing a different reality where you see a disparity between the schools that have more resources to help their students and the schools that don't. And I think that's just something that is exacerbated by what we already see, where different schools have different fundings, different resources within their communities, and they serve different populations. So to use 2 examples, and sorry if there's anybody on the line from these schools, but Cabrillo College, which has some more resources than the average school maybe, has been doing things like providing safe parking spaces on their parking structures for their homeless or housing insecure students. That's a fantastic idea, but maybe something that can't be occurring at every district. However, I have students and friends who go to Wiafe College, and they don't even necessarily have pass, no pass options last that I checked. So I think that's just one of the realities of our system, where you're seeing a massive discrepancy in what's been occurring statewide. What the SSCCC has been doing has been gathering student concerns and communicating those. Initially, it was around a lot of the same things of basic needs, resources, and student access to education, especially as we transition online, and especially because our system serves some of the neediest students who have the least resources. But now we're also trying to look at the long-term repercussions, and especially how this may affect the amount of funding that our system gets, while we're also getting this massive influx of people who always come to further their education in the midst of a recession. So we've been trying to look at those 2 issues, as well as how to advocate, as well as keeping in mind some of our less vocal populations who are equally needy. So to use one example that I think is illustrative, our incarcerated population is not a group that I hear advocated for very often. However, they have very pressing needs, especially at a time like this. I think it's very easy for a group like that, which doesn't have, especially strong coalitions or very public advocates pushing for it. Not to say that they don't exist, just that sometimes they get left behind. I think looking at groups like that and seeing what we can do to advocate for them is something that the SSCCC will increasingly look to do. I think we're also going to try to use this as a learning lesson. One of the problems that I think is happening now is, since our organizations are historically underserved, underfunded, and when they face a massive crisis like this, you see stuff like mental health funding, basic needs funding that has sometimes been left to the wayside, really coming back to bite us. Looking at something like mental health funding, we see that students again and again and again ask for this type of thing. However, for a variety of reasons, it maybe isn't implemented as much as we would like. Which means that in general, our students, now that they really have this pressing need, don't have the infrastructure. And now when everything is a top of the agenda priority item, where everything has this overwhelming need, and it's really hard to cut costs and see what should or shouldn't be prioritized, it's really hard to go back and try to rectify those as we're trying to deal with all these other problems. For continuing on the priorities lens, I think something that is also very important for the SSCCC is intersegmental collaboration. I think somewhat there's been this siloing between three systems and just, across the board, where obviously everybody just has so much on their plate that they can't maybe communicate or address concerns on an intersegmental level. But I think especially as students, we do need to stay united, and we need to continue to provide a unified front. All of our issues tend to be the same, or they have the same root cause. So looking at points of collaboration and intersection where we can advocate on a unified front for stuff like more funding, or making sure that the decreases to funding that are sure to come as the state deals with this very important issue of how to make sure that this transition into a recession is as painless as possible. How can we ensure that student voices are elevated, our concerns addressed, and that our neediest and most vulnerable populations, who are going to be the same across most systems, are continuing to get the care and respect and their concerns addressed. That's no easy task, and I think one of the things that's been heartening as we continue to press forward is seeing that while it's not an easy task, our leaders have risen to the occasion at every level. I think it's just one of those cases where the reality is so hard that there's never going to be a perfect answer. But to end on that note, we are really grateful for everything that's been done at the executive level in the state and the legislature, who has reached out to us consistently, and through our system partners, whether that be some of the other student groups on the line or public advocates, for reaching out to us and continuing to take our concerns seriously.
Thank you so much, Amine, for raising such important issues, specifically around formerly incarcerated students. I haven't really heard about that population being uplifted in a lot of these conversations. So I really appreciate you naming that, as well as the need for all segments to have a unified front, or at least students, right? And starting from there and really moving the needle for student voice. Thank you again. Amine, really appreciate you. We'll come back to you later when we have Q&A. Now I'd like to move forward with our next incredible student panelist, Michael Wiafe. Michael serves as the president of the Cal State Student Association, which is an auxiliary organization that represents the over 480,000 students on the 23 campuses of the CSU. Michael is an immigrant raised in the Inland Empire and is a graduating senior from San Diego State University, where he has been studying political science. Michael will be attending grad school in the fall, hoping to go into a career of policymaking. So without any more hesitation, Michael, please take it away. How has the coronavirus impacted CSU students, and what are CSU's priorities for local and state policymaking at this time?
Thank you, Karina. And I want to thank everyone on this call for tuning in and listening to some of the student perspective, and public advocates for taking lead in putting this together. I want to start off by saying that every single student within the CSU, and I think every single student in the state, is going through their own unique experience. And they have challenges that come with them based on factors that influence their lives and how all of those factors also may have changed. Each of the 23 campuses in the CSU has different resources and infrastructure in place to be able to accommodate the needs of their students. CSSA did draft a letter outlining the issues that we've identified as pressing needs of students. This include basic needs resources, housing, student employment, technology resources, academic progress, and more, with the conversation evolving every single day as new challenges are discovered. Being able to collaborate with administration, our letter was met with a response from the chancellor addressing each of the areas that we raised and ensuring that our engagement continues. With classes now being virtual, services essential to success have also needed to make the transition, including advising, disability accommodations, mental health services, and many more. Although many of the over 40,000 students living on campus across the system have been forced to return home, there are still on-campus housing facilities available for students who have indicated that they need it for welfare reasons. The neediest students have found themselves without some of the technological resources that are needed in order to be successful. This includes consistent working internet connection, laptops, and others. Campuses have been addressing this on a case-by-case basis and have been providing support. However, oftentimes it is not enough. And as I mentioned before, each campus does have different amount of resources to be able to provide this level of support. There's also been a call to refund student fees. Each campus does have different student fees. But campuses have included prorated refunds for housing, parking, services, and facility fees that are considered non-mandatory. However, tuition and other mandatory campus fees will not be refunded. This takes us to the utmost pressing concern for students, which is finances. Students receiving federal work study who are no longer to work on campus have been able to continue receiving regular pay using federal funds. However, students working on campus through third-party vendors, usually dining services, or have jobs off campus, many have found themselves out of a job and therefore unable to pay for mandatory expenses, which has been increasingly difficult space to navigate for many. Thousands of CSU students have already lost their jobs or have had their hours cut drastically. Many were left out of the federal economic relief package due to technicalities and therefore in need of more financial resources. CSSA has called for federal representatives to ensure that student needs are addressed, and we don't know how long that'll take. Students housed on campus have been able to get refunds, but students such as myself are stuck in off-campus leases that we cannot break despite not having a job or being back home as all classes are online. So again, this has been a very difficult space for many students to be able to navigate. There have also been academic challenges, such as required hands-on work for nursing or teaching credential students. I won't go into too detail in the interest of time. However, I do want to highlight that we need to ensure that students are not punished academically for this crisis, and that they're able to still graduate on time. And there have been challenges that have been raised with this issue in ensuring that students are not have to stay in the university for much longer because of this. And there have been changes also outlined by the CSU and changes to the admission process to mitigate the challenges for incoming students as well. However, a barrier that college students are facing that I don't think is being addressed by decision makers is the overwhelming feeling of uncertainty about our future and the lack of productivity that comes along with that. I think that that is one of the things that I've heard students talk over and over about how that's affecting their academics, about how it's affecting their future. We have graduating seniors attempting to enter the workforce possibly during the worst time to try to do so. I've heard of some getting dropped from previously secured opportunities, students who are unsure of whether to continue their education and come back in the fall. Myself and others have seen a decrease in productivity, as I mentioned, lack of motivation. And all of this comes from being removed from the inspiring and determined campus environment. One of the critical resources that we also had on campus was each other. And unless you were connected previously through social media, we've all kind of lost that connection with each other. And the ability to share ideas among peers. Zoom has not been the most conducive environment that would be able for us to connect with each other and our professors in the way that's required for us to be academically supported and academically successful. And this will be and has been difficult to address. I'm convinced that this will have a significant impact on these current students in the future. And I asked for everyone to keep their door open, continue asking questions, keep students engaged, and ensure that students are included in the decision making, because I think that there's so much that we still don't know, and that there's going to be a lot of information that comes out in the future. This can't be a one and done conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. Just as you mentioned, this can't be a one and done conversation. And another piece that really resonated with me from what you mentioned is students should not be punished academically for this pandemic, for coronavirus. Thank you again for sharing those pieces and how it really depends on student to student, case by case. As we know, segment by segment with having each rep on, but also campus by campus, and one shoe doesn't fit all. So I really appreciate you raising those concerns. And I'd now like to switch over to our third panelist, Aidan Arasasingham, a third-year student at UCLA, majoring in global studies with minors in urban and regional studies and art history. In his role as government relations chair at the UC Student Association, Aidan coordinates the advocacy teams of the 9 UC campuses associations at the local, university, state, and federal levels. He's especially focused on advancing pro-student affordability and accessibility policies that benefit UC's most marginalized students. Aidan, building off of what Amine and Michael have shared, what do policymakers need to know about the UC student experience during this global pandemic, keeping students from their campus classes and classmates as well?
Well, thank you for the question, and thank you for to public advocates for the opportunity to share my perspective as a UC student. And thank you to my fellow intersegmental student leaders for joining me in elevating the concerns that the millions of students statewide share. Even though we might come from different organizations and different segments, we're all online students right now and share a lot of similar, concerns in this global pandemic. And UC students are facing significant barriers right now, and those barriers are compounded for our most vulnerable UC populations. Early in March, UCSA developed a letter of priorities that has since turned into a living document of student support needs in the path to recovery from COVID-19. We've been successful so far in guaranteeing paid leave for student workers, refunds of campus housing and dining costs, emergency basic needs grants for students, forbearance on UC loans, and other gains for UC students. But even so, there's still much to be done for our most vulnerable student populations. In particular, undocumented students have been completely left out of the federal CARES Act relief, despite facing some of the highest burdens as a result of this pandemic. And that's not even considering the impact that the impending Supreme Court DACA decision will have on our DACA students, and the immense cost of living challenges faced by our non-DACA students. Students with a disability are uniquely impacted as a result of the transition to online education, as a result of the accessibility concerns for audio and visual equipment and technology. Student parents, even before this pandemic hit, were already among the most basic needs insecure student populations and are now struggling to take care of their families while also attending class and staying up to date with classes. For our formerly foster youth students, in the immediate aftermath of campus closures, many of our former foster youth became housing insecure, understanding that there wasn't a place to go back home or communities to rely on. And in addition, half of UC's foster care centers are running on one-time donation funds that can run out as early as this summer to support formerly foster youth students at the UC. And for our student workers, which make up a significant population of UC, we've been able to secure protections for our on-campus student workers in the short term, but off-campus student workers or student workers working multiple jobs, both on campus and off campus, have very little protection right now. So we need to be clear that the populations being impacted at UC the most are our most vulnerable populations, the populations that we were advocating for before and we're facing the burden of the high cost of living in this state and the lack of support from the university. But that's only compounded now in this global pandemic. We also need to be very clear about the inequities posed by online education. There's a severe digital gap among faculty, with many still struggling to provide the content remotely or run classes interactively. The quality of education for UC students has been impacted, with many students feeling frustrated by the quality of education they pay for the most expensive public education in the state. Steps have been taken already to remedy the challenges by providing tech grants to students, asking faculty and TAs to exercise leniency in grading, and different pass, no pass options for students. But these efforts have been largely localized and have not been able to be replicated at scale system-wide. Another important thing to raise is also the fact that we need to be very clear that our institutions are being heavily impacted as a result financially of COVID-19. Recently, I'm sure many of you have seen that the UC system has lost over $500 million in just the first month of this pandemic as a result of campus closures. We need the legislature to keep funding institutions of higher ed, and we can't afford any cuts to higher education right now. And in fact, on the contrary, we need more support now for our students and for education more than ever. Much like a return to normalcy for our state will not be immediate, returning to school will also be not like turning a switch on. And major shifts need to be made in order to ensure that students, should we return to campus, are food and housing insecure, have expanded capacity for classes offered so that students don't miss essential course milestones toward their degree as a result of deferring education during this crisis, and that resources are provided for students with additional needs. The road to recovery will be long and difficult, but as we start to pivot our strategy from response to recovery, students need to be at the center of this conversation. So if you're interested in learning more about the ways UC students are impacted, I'd encourage you to join us on our series of webinars next week for our UC Student Association Digital UC Student Lobby Conference. We'll be having 8 webinars focusing on issues impacting our most marginalized students with student, UC state, and federal leaders, and you can go to ucsa.org for more details. So I hope that you'll join us in partnership. I once again appreciate public advocates for the platform to share our student concerns. and look forward to working with you as leaders throughout the state to make sure that we center the needs of students in the recovery ahead.
Thank you so much, Aidan. I really appreciate you raising, again, the most marginalized students that, and the inequities that they could be facing right now, such as the documented students and foster youth. I really appreciate you sharing your perspectives right now on behalf of UCSA, and also inviting us to join the Lobby Week webinars that y'all are having. Thank you so much. Now I'd like to switch over to our 4 student panelists, Gloria Alonso Cruz, Chair of Yo Soy I Am. Gloria is in her 2nd year at San Joaquin Delta College. She will be transferring in the fall of 2020 to pursue a major in urban studies and public policy. Gloria is committed to immigrant rights. She has been involved with several community organizing efforts, ranging from advocating for undocumented student resources at the local and state level to providing support and resources for deportation defense through demonstrations and community forums. Gloria, thank you for joining us, and I'd love to give you the floor now. Can you tell us about the student experience at Delta College, particularly around the concerns and issues of undocumented students?
Thank you, Karina, and thank you, public advocates, for providing this space for us to share our concerns and how we have been addressing them. So first of all, I am here representing the immigrant and undocumented population in the Central Valley, more specifically in the San Joaquin area. I'll be sharing with you that immigration is not a one-sided issue, and that many of the things students have shared are issues that we faced every day in our lives. Everything is very intersectional. Students in the I Am student organization have made us aware about several issues that the population now is facing as a whole, and that need to be addressed differently because they are coming from different social backgrounds, and they need or they have different needs. Before COVID-19, our student organization was involved on campus and the Stockton community, and we learned how to mobilize through community organizing, which has helped us a lot right now, because being undocumented often puts us on a spot where we cannot rely on institutions to solve our problems. So now that we have this, and now that we have community organizing as a way to cope with the barriers that COVID-19 has placed for our community, we have in a way separated the issues that we face. There are the issues that we face on a personal level and the ones that we faced on a community and institutional level. And because our network is very small, we have managed to connect with one another and check in with one another to see how we can help us. We have shared resources like food, and even provided financial assistance through small fundraisers, because we know that the undocumented and immigrant population was not included in the relief bill, as some other students mentioned earlier. So right now, I just want to make you aware about how we have been coping with this. We truly recommend relying on our collective power to be able to overcome this challenge now. We have seen that relying on our institution has been a problem with us. Recently in the Delta community, we were facing a problem with the grading system, where barely a week ago, the administration notified us that they were gonna implement the pass and no pass grading system, which we took as a delayed response, because a lot of the students in the Delta community and the Central Valley are disproportionately impacted by this. And the I Am student organization got together and drafted a letter to the administration where we expressed our concerns and let the administration know that it was urgent for them to share a response in regards of this. Aside from this, the way we have been working in the community, outside of the educational institution, has been by collaborating with other organizations that have a more accessible way to connect with resources in the undocumented and immigrant community. Again, the restrictions to resources are really wide. and they affect us in very different ways. They require sometimes forms of identification that we don't have or our parents don't have. And so it's, even though the resources to address this is to rely on our collective power and in our communities. So if you want to learn more about how we're addressing this, or if you want to get advice on how you can start your own fundraiser, as we learn, feel free to reach out. And if you have any, or if you know about any undocumented populations throughout California that are going through similar things, feel free to reach out. We need to be creative on the ways we can address this, especially for people that don't have a citizenship status.
Thank you so much, Gloria. I really appreciate you being very vulnerable and apologetic as well with what you're sharing. I know that's not always very easy to do so. And I also love hearing more about how y'all are being creative, which is definitely necessary right now. But also, again, that shouldn't be the long-term solution of when we really need to support all of our students, not having them rely on them, just themselves to get themselves food or access to certain resources. Even though it's hard right now during this time, it's still something that we really need our leaders to also support our students with. So now I'd like to go to our final, but definitely we have so much more to talk about. But last but definitely not least, our good student panelist, Bryan Daley, who is actually on the phone right now, so you won't be able to see his face, but you'll hear his voice. And now I'd like to introduce Bryan. He is a student at the Community College of San Francisco, a student member of the CCSF Board of Trustees, and a leader in Students Making a Change, also known as SMAC. Bryan will enter the UC Berkeley Conservation and Resource Studies program in the fall of 2020. As a second-generation American citizen, Bryan has seen the way that disaster and hardship disproportionately affect communities of color, especially those with high immigrant populations. Bryan hopes to use his education to employ an equity-based mindset in the hopes of mitigating the effects of climate change on a local and international level. Bryan, SMAC has done a tremendous job of advocating for CCF students during this crisis. I've seen your incredible website and have heard of a lot of your own efforts too to have fundraisers and bring food resources to students. On that note, what are the main issues CCSF students are facing, and what are SMAC's priority demands?
So on that note, just double checking, everyone hear me? Can you hear me, Karina?
Yeah, I can hear you. Sounds
okay.
Like everyone else
All right,
can.
thank you. Just wanted to be sure I'm still driving. But on that note, we have found that our CCSF students are facing a lot of the same issues that they were facing before this crisis, but are seeing those issues being exacerbated by this situation. So of course, things like housing issues, food insecurity, and paying for the basic needs to continue their education, such as textbooks and things of that nature. And as we're seeing in our school specifically, as you mentioned, SMAC has been working with community partners to try to fill some of these needs, but we're seeing a bit of a lack of leadership in our community college, specifically because we have just lost our chancellor recently. So there's a lot of focus on side issues that are not necessarily serving the students first. And so I want to wrap around and thank all the students for being here, because as a student activist organization, we have to be the ones to put students first, because in these times we see that our community colleges are using that as more of a marketing ploy than an actual means for prioritizing needs that are being met. So at this moment, we're seeing that students are being served in more of trickle-down tactics, such as prioritizing counselors to ensure that they can serve students. But at the moment, we're seeing a lot of students flounder and not being afforded the direct services that they are used to receiving. So our school is currently directing students to outside resources throughout the community, such as food banks that are set up and housing programs. But in this time of crisis, we're seeing that students are not being prioritized in the way that they are when they receive these services from their school. So, for instance, with our food banks, our students are used to receiving food at the school, and now they're placed at the back of these lines at food banks with customers that already frequent these locations. So now our students are having to scramble in ways that they haven't before, when a lot of our students are already in survival mode on a daily basis. I will commend our school for releasing guidelines around grading for our students' classes. There has been leadership there, and we have heard news that our student workers will continue to be paid throughout this crisis, even if they cannot continue to carry out their duties. But we're seeing that a lot of the people that were not being served before are still not being served because we don't have the infrastructure in place to source their needs properly and to find out exactly who is still not connecting to the resources that are available. So as my colleagues in the UC system and CSU and CCC system have mentioned, we're seeing that communities of color and all communities along equity lines are just having their situations worsened compared to the previous status that they were in. So at the moment, we're just seeing students that are quite lost. So we're trying to hold polls with students on our social media websites such as Instagram and Twitter. So you can follow SMAC at SMAC_CCSF. And from there, we will be sourcing your issues and trying to connect with community partners such as stakeholders within the city and organizations set up by our city and county of San Francisco to meet the needs of students.
Thank you so much, Bryan. Really appreciate you taking the time as you're moving right now and transit. Really appreciate you joining us for this call on behalf of students making a change. What you've mentioned is really also resonated with what I've been hearing from students as well, along the lines of not always having campus leaders really being very generous or genuine with kind of the impact they're having during this time with students. So I appreciate you and also fearlessly sharing that as well. And now, before we transition to one poll, our third poll, I'd like to hand over the mic to Carolina Reyes from the University of La Verne. She is part of the Association of Independent California Colleges and Universities, a student with them, and knowing that we were having the student panel, thank you so much for reaching out to have their voice included as well. So Carolina, are you on the line?
Hi, thank you, Karina. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay, great. Hi, my name is Carolina Reyes, and I'm a student at the University of La Verne.
studying business administration. I'm a student advocate with the Independent California Colleges Advocate Program with AICCU. The previous comments from our public counterparts resonate with the students of the independent nonprofit higher education sector as well, given that 50% of our Cal Grant recipients are first generation and 46% Latino. Given that our sector serves over 28,000 Cal Grant recipients and nearly 35,000 adult learners, we ask for equitable distribution for any emergency student aid provided during the COVID-19 throughout the different sectors in higher education, to include the nonprofit private institutions. I think some of the issues that my counterparts expressed definitely are the same throughout our colleges. Something that kind of stood out was the uncertainty that a lot of students are facing with this transition to the online. And as a student parent myself, I think that definitely those, as Aidan was speaking about the most vulnerable populations, I think that definitely there's opportunity to better support those populations as the student parents are transitioning not only themselves to be online distant learners, but also caring for their families and their children, and having to be full-time teachers now as well. I think another issue that was brought up was the pass no pass option with a lot of colleges, and I think that there's a lot of uncertainty there as well with students that has been brought up as to whether that is accepted or not for certain universities, transferring into another university, and whether that's going to be an issue in the future. So I think the consistency throughout the different universities and colleges in that area as well is an opportunity. So I think right now is definitely important for us to be a unified front and to advocate for that support and funding needed to assist students throughout this crisis. I'd just like to end with thanking public advocates for allowing us to speak. Also, Lande Ajose and Marlene Garcia from CSAC. Thank you all for your strong support and for for being there for these students in the higher education sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolina. And with that, we're now going to transition to our third poll. And as I ask, this is a poll for students only. So as I ask students to fill out this poll, I'd like folks to signal who they are in the Q&A. I'm just wondering if we have, without the chat box, it's a little tricky to do this. But yes, if you are able to write in your questions and also share who you are and identify yourselves, that'd be really helpful to just see who else we have in the crowd. But yes, students, please fill out this poll. We'd like to understand more of what 2 to 3 issues students have elevated from a student panel that resonate with you and our students do know since the onset of COVID-19. About 20 students have filled out the poll. And right now I can see technology Wi-Fi access is a huge issue that resonated with our students in the audience. You can also see that distance learning. I was speaking to a student recently who shared that when we think of distance learning, I think it's, it's not very descriptive, but the students shared just how they don't learn online. That's not their way of learning. And I think highlighting that is also really important. Just all the different ways distance learning could be a barrier for students, not just maybe the physical aspect, but all that entails as well, along with the technology, Wi-Fi access, and so forth. Mental health. Thank you, folks, for sharing that as well. That's the one that has 53% of our vote so far. And we have 33 students who have answered this poll. Couple more seconds to see if we have any others. All right. So I just want folks to take a moment to look at that, specifically for our policymakers and our leaders on the line, higher ed leaders, just to get a glance at what some of the top issues our students are facing that our student panelists raise that also resonate with them. So just let that sink in for our students in the audience, just to let you know you aren't alone during this time. As you can see, mental health, housing, employment, tech, Wi-Fi access, distance learning, so forth, issues that your fellow peers are also facing statewide. And with that, we're going to end the poll. Thank you for participating, and we're going to move on now. So I know we're getting now to the second half of the webinar, and I just want folks to take a little stretch break. I know I need that. And while you stretch, I take a deep breath, and just want to give a huge shout out to some folks that we have on the line. My colleagues are helping me identify, because I can't really see everyone that's on, but I'd like to thank Assembly Member Kevin McCarty for joining us. I'd like to also thank staff from Senator Stephen Glacier's office for joining us, and let's see who else we have on. Trying to see if I can check this out too. And you can hear my text messages in the background, sorry about that. We also have our former executive director of the California Student Aid Commission, and now the chief deputy of the SPI's office, Lupita Cortes Alcala, on, so thank you. And
Karina,
before we jump into, sorry, what was that?
This is Rigel. I was just curious, Assemblymember McCarty's hand is up. Assemblymember, did you want to say hello? Oh, hand is down. Okay, or thank you so much for being on. And folks, we do. There is another person with the hands up. Feel free to put your questions into the Q&A. That would be best for us. Thanks so much. Sorry, Karina, go ahead.
Thanks for that. In this virtual world of no longer one mic, one diva community agreement, but one hand with virtual hand up. So thanks for flagging that, Rigel. And yeah, I'd just really like to thank our movers and shakers at the state level for being here. I really appreciate you and your staff participating as well. I'm now going to transition to a final thank you for our student panel. Please stay on. I want to invite everyone to virtually give them a round of applause. I don't think we can do it on Q&A, but in mind and spirit, I just want to give you a million thank yous for sharing such in-depth and thoughtful remarks, and just again, the experiences that y'all are facing, your peers are facing, and for being so open and honest with us is something that I'm so grateful for, and I really appreciate everyone on the line listening to y'all, and I hope this continues, again, not just this webinar, but we continue to work together and to, of course, first and foremost, listen to students. So I'm just gonna go back to the next step of our agenda. Give me 1 second, folks, thank you. All right. So I'm going to introduce now Dr. Lande Ajose. Now we're transitioning to our policymaker panel. Dr. Lande Ajose, I know you're so humble and you don't always like to go by doctor, but I feel like that is just always a must. And I want to thank you for being here with us today. Lande, if I may, as a senior policy advisor for higher education for the office of Governor Gavin Newsom, Lande is a champion for equity and student voice, particularly for low-income adults. Before joining the Newsom administration, Lande was an executive director of California Competes and a member of the California Student Aid Commission. She is California educated from for her PA to her PhD. She's all been here in the Golden State and was our keynote speaker at our inaugural HearThe Students event back in October. Thank you for being here with us today. Lande, we've heard the daily press briefings, and we realize the priority has rightly been on Californians' health first and foremost, and health in the healthcare system. And we also know that you've still managed to maintain other priorities. Is there anything that strikes you about our panel or our poll results? And can you tell us about the governor's efforts to help college students during this time?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you all. You can hear me, I hope.
Yeah.
Thank you all for having me. I appreciate being able to actually just bear witness to the student voices that we've heard and get that kind of granular understanding and feeling of what it's actually like to have weathered the last 6 weeks as a student in California. I think I've been witnessing it from the perspective of my own children who have moved to distance learning. And I kind of toggle back and forth between this very personal experience and then trying to think globally around what does that mean for California's college students? And how do we, as the governor often says, how do we meet the moment for college students in particular and for our institutions when this moment is, as many others say, is so unprecedented and is nothing that any of us have ever lived through before. And as several of the speakers said, the vulnerabilities that we already exist have been kind of laid bare for everyone to see, and the inequities that we live with on a day-to-day basis have been spotlighted, I think, as a result of the virus and of COVID-19. So I just want to just say from the bottom of my heart that I really hope everyone is being as safe and as healthy as they possibly can. Meeting the healthcare needs of Californians is absolutely the first priority. And I know that I look across the nation and see what different states are doing, and I feel really proud to be a Californian in this moment and to feel like we're all in it together. And many of the students and the institutions who have reached out to me have done so in a way that's really about maximizing what's best for all of us. So I just want to appreciate that. In terms of the comments and the poll results, I really appreciate hearing about some of the issues that the students have raised. The issue about distance learning, I think, is one of the first ones that I have been really focused on. I think, as you all well know, higher education is not a system that moves quickly. And so while it has been very bumpy and unequal, I actually am really proud of the way in which all of our institutions stepped up and were able to pivot in 2 weeks' time, 2 to 3 weeks' time, to try to keep as many students engaged in their learning and in their academic progress as possible. So that's like step one, but that is the floor. It is not the promise of what we are aspiring to. And so one of the things we're doing is trying to think hard about what is the role of distance learning in education. It is not a panacea, but it can be helpful. And as we live in a state that does encounter lots of disasters, one of the things that I've been tasked with thinking about is how do we ensure that higher education is ever more resilient on the other side of this crisis? What does that look like? And the crisis that we're experiencing now around a pandemic is but one. We also know that we enter fire season every year, and that has an effect on students in ways that are disparate relative to other populations in the state. We also know that we live in earthquake country. So I'm really trying to think through how do we fashion a system of resilience and responsiveness so that students are well taken care of as we have to encounter the variety of types of issues that are presented by virtue of living in California. So that's one. I think the other pieces that we've been really thinking about is the piece on how to ensure that students remain as whole as possible, that the dislocations that have resulted from this mean that people don't have jobs, people, as Michael mentioned, sometimes you're still paying rent, that we have increases in housing insecurity. We have certain student populations who find their homes, their primary is their campus. So we tried to balance, as I was in conversation with the segment leaders, balance the need for campuses to scale down and for students to be wherever their primary home was as safe as possible, and also for students who did not have those options and choices to maintain campus being open. I was really glad to hear that mostly uniformly institutions were refunding those things that could be refunded, like housing, parking, food and dining services. And it's also clear that students rely in many cases on their institutions for things like Wi-Fi and technology. And so that has been a huge gap, and it's a gap that we need to face, not just for higher education, but for education as a whole. We're thinking a lot about what does it mean to really, in the state of California, close the digital divide? And can we use that as the outcome, one of the outcomes from this emergency, which is like we get really serious around the state, around one, making sure that there's broadband in all corners of the state, and then two, trying to figure out what we need to do to ensure that students have the actual technological resources that they need to be able to be educated. Then I just want to speak to this issue of mental health, because what we are all experiencing is enormously stressful. I will never forget the Student Aid Commission meeting that I attended, where I heard students, we had members of UC-CSU and community colleges, and we asked them, what is your primary concern or need? And I thought we were going to hear, we need larger Cal grants. And they actually said, we need more mental health services at our institutions. And that was in a time where we were not in emergency. So I can only imagine what those needs are now. I know that we've heard from the AICCU around ensuring that students who had to go home and leave the state are able to maintain whatever connection that they had to health services and receive those mental health services in an interstate, given technology. And so that's something that we are currently working on, but really trying to think about how do we maintain those services, because those need for those services have peaked. I'm going to stop talking, but just so that I run through really quickly what we have been working on. As you all probably know, UC-CSU Community College and the AICCU segments have all published guidance about what their response is in regards to both admissions in the coming year, as well as for students matriculating, looking at issues such as pass-fail and how that will be treated. And that includes for rising high school students, as well as for rising seniors, as well as current seniors who are maybe taking classes pass-fail. We have an executive order that we put out on the 16th that waived certain requirements in the Ed Code. I'm sorry, on April 16th, that waived certain requirements in the Ed Code for the CSU to allow them to modify their admission criteria so that they will not have to rely on the SAT or other kinds of standardized tests. And I think that's an important move so that students don't feel like they are further disadvantaged. As you know, the UC has also suspended the standardized testing for the rising seniors. Most everyone, as I mentioned, has moved to online learning, and most have suspended in-person classes. I know that at some segments that has actually posed a challenge if there's hands-on research. We did a lot of advocacy to have our board of registered nurses modify their requirements so that nursing students could actually take 50% of their in-person requirements as simulations, so that those students would be on task, on time to graduate and actually enter the workforce. So that was important. And the prorating of various fees based on students moving out of their residence halls. So we've been involved in all of those decisions. I think in terms of going forward, part of, again, what I'm really looking at is how do we think about the resiliency? And, I'm very sobered by the fact that we are going to be in a very, very different budget situation in the coming year, and trying to get very clear on what that means in terms of support for higher education and how we keep students enrolled, and how we ensure that students are getting their financial aid. So those are the issues that I'm thinking about for students who are making that transition to college or are currently in college and want to be able to complete.
Thank you so much, Lande, for that very thorough personal response, as well as giving us so many great updates and what you've seen happen. The piece around closing the digital divide, and hopefully for good, very much so resonates with me, and knowing that this situation could last not just a couple more months, but maybe longer. So thank you for that, and thank you for raising.
Can I add just
around mental health? Of course.
The one thing I wanted to add is one of the things I heard was around undocumented students and the lack of resources there. And I just wanted to note that last week we established a $125 million fund for undocumented folks in California to be able to apply. And that would include students. So if you are a student and you are over the age of 18, you are not eligible for any of the federal aid through CARES, and you're experiencing any kind of hardship, you are eligible for one of these $500 awards. And that, the one thing is the awards are limited to only 2 awards per household. So that is one constraint. But the amount of need there is among students is very clear to me. I was in conversation with the College Futures Foundation as they were standing up their awards for students, $500 awards. In the first 90 minutes, they had over 1,000 applications. They ended up with over 65,000 folks on a wait list for $500 awards, which speaks to the tremendous financial need right now. So I'm very mindful of that, and we're going to continue to work on that. So I just wanted you to know about the fund for disaster relief for immigrants.
Thank you so much, and I really appreciate you sharing that as well, for folks on our panel and for folks in the audience as well. And again, thank you for what you shared with us. And now I'm going to transition to my final introduction of this afternoon is for the esteemed Marlene Garcia, Executive Director of the California Student Aid Commission. Marlene has 25 years of experience working on education policy issues for a variety of government and higher education institutions, and highlights include her positions as Vice Chancellor of Government Relations for the California Community Colleges, as well as Deputy State Policy Director for the California State University System, and as a Senior Policy Consultant in the Senate Education Committee. She is also California educated from Golden State, and a champion of much needed financial aid reform. Marlene, thank you so much for joining us. And we know financial aid is the lifeline for higher education for so many students. And we applaud your recent efforts in the Cal Grant modernization proposal that was shared right before shelter in place and everything started to occur. You've managed to quickly pivot, however, to uplift students' financial needs during coronavirus. Can you talk about what CSAC is doing during this time?
Thank you, Karina, and thank you to public advocates and to all the student representatives who are really the voice of students up and down the state. And, in this shelter-in-place environment, we know that there's a lot of struggle and fear out there, but it's really hard to know exactly what that feels like on the ground level. So you being here today and the 100+ people on the call, I'm really looking forward to hearing thoughts and experiences, because we're, like everyone said, we have no precedent to learn by. This is completely new, what we're dealing with. And I think that, my role in terms of the Student Aid Commission is to look specifically at affordability and the impact this is all having on student lives. And I'll talk a little bit about where we are with the Cal Grant modernization and what we're focusing on now, because there are immediate needs now that are different than what we had originally envisioned earlier this year. But I do want to just talk briefly about one of the things that I'm looking at is what does the longer view look like for the state of California and for young people who are trying to figure out what's next, where do they go in their lives, and education, the role that it plays. I have 3 millennials in my household, and I know for all of them, it's very uncertain. Jobs are uncertain. I was just reading about the UCLA, a group of UCLA economists are predicting that by June of this year, we could have a 16% unemployment rate, which we know as an average, that doesn't reflect how different regions of our state are going to suffer with layoffs and unemployment. I also took a look at another report by the Economic Roundtable, and in the next several years, we could see in some regions in the state close to half of our population unemployed. Now, I don't want to sound like a Debbie Downer, and we all know that we've got challenges ahead, but I think right now we're in the midst and the thick of the health crisis, and I have to say I've been so impressed with this governor and the efforts to try to get us through this and get us back to some normalcy in our lives, and so we can rebuild the economy. I think that he is doing an amazing job along with all the team, and Lande included in that. But I also think very quickly, as soon as we start going back to work and back to school, whenever that happens to be, we're going to start understanding the depths of this induced economic crisis. And I think that we all have to be, it's a pretty sobering concept of what we're going to experience. But I do think that we are a resourceful people here in California. We have the Silicon Valley. We have a robust and rich immigrant history. We're a state of survivors. We're a state of people who will make it right and will come out of it at the other end stronger and really looking at the world differently. That's what we need right now with leadership. So I don't mean to sound like, oh my gosh, everything's going to fall apart. No, the opposite. You all are going to be the ones who help us re-envision the future for this state and ultimately this country. So my focus is really on ensuring that you get the academic support to keep you in college and to keep those who follow behind you in college, because my biggest fear is that the economic uncertainty is going to cause lots of questions about, is it the right time for me to go to college? Maybe I should take a gap year. Maybe my younger brother or sister who's going, an incoming freshman, maybe they should take a gap year. My parents lost their jobs. I lost my job. Those are the real questions that huge numbers of Californians are asking themselves right now. So I'm really doing everything I can with partners and stakeholders like yourselves to really figure out how we can leverage every opportunity for college students, because I believe at my core, you are a significant part of California's economic recovery. So we have to invest in you. It's hard right now because there's so much going on in terms of basic life and issues with people not having homes. A lot of the attention is providing those core safety net issues and health issues. But I think once we get through that and some of the dust settles, we're going to start looking at, okay, what are those communities that we have to help get through this and help us regain our strength as a state? And that's college students. So I am committed to really, really hitting that message and really doing everything I can with you to create that platform so that we can ensure that people understand what your precise needs are. So we, earlier this year, we were really excited about the Cal Grant modernization. We issued this beautiful report, which we thought was an ambitious but smart plan for redesigning Cal Grants to better serve students, particularly the basic needs of students. And then that report was literally submitted to the legislature on March 6th. By March 9th, of course, we found ourselves in this, we were moving into a shelter-in-place moment. And all of a sudden, modernization just started kind of taking a back seat. But what I want to emphasize is that even though the full modernization proposal is not the right timing to move it, we are not going to give up, because we're going to need that eventually more than ever to help students get through college and get into that workforce with the skills we desperately need. But for right now, I also want to emphasize that the centerpiece of Cal Grant modernization was basic needs, because historically California has really been a tuition-centric state in terms of its financial aid policies. So what we were able to do is say, California is a very expensive place to live, and living expenses have outpaced even tuition. And so it's unaffordable for many students to go to college. So we have emphasized the need to add basic needs aid into the cost of attendance, and that financial aid should be part of funding that. So we're going to continue developing that message and pushing it in this environment that makes sense. And of course, if students were struggling last year with basic needs, this year it's an even more daunting challenge. So what we're looking at are a handful of initiatives or requests, I guess it's more appropriate, to try and do a couple of things for students. One, we want to do what we can to enhance current aid with emergency one-time emergency funds. And two, we want to eliminate red tape to make it as easy as possible for students to meet basic verification requirements that stand between them and getting their actual Cal Grant award. So the first thing I'll talk about is we have requested 3 executive orders. One that would deal with delaying the requirement that you provide your GPA before you get your Cal Grant award. That completes your financial aid process. And for some students, they're right stuck in this period when all the schools or colleges are closed. It's very difficult for them to get GPA verification. So we're going to delay that, we would hope, until September 2nd. And because the legislature hasn't been in, it's really challenging to do that, because you'd have to waive a statute to do that. The second is every Cal Grant recipient has to verify that they're a high school graduation. Again, another administrative challenge when schools and colleges are closed, how, that makes it really difficult and stressful on students to get that verification. And this applies more to the incoming students, some of your friends, some of your siblings that they may be experiencing, not so much for all of you. And so we're requesting to waive that requirement. The third one is specifically for CADA students, primarily male CADA students, and that is all students to be eligible for a Cal Grant. It follows the federal financial aid regulations, are required to apply for the selective service. Well, for CADA students, they don't apply online. They apply through a manual process because they don't have social security numbers. So what they have to do is send in this paper, get it approved, and then once they get it approved, then they take that paper to their college and then they get their Cal Grant award. Well, the selective service offices are closed, so they have no way of getting that registration approved or verified. So we're asking that be waived for them this year, that they can get their Cal Grant released without that. So those are some immediate things that we're working on to make it easier for students, make it easier for administrators. The second thing we're doing is we, along with everyone, we're searching and scouring and trying to find where we can identify some funds to supplement, which we would prioritize the highest need students, the ones who receive the competitive Cal Grant B. There's about 71,000 students in that category, and right now they get $1,672. Most of them are at community colleges, some at 4 years. But what we're seeking is we'd like to put in a request that every governor in the state has received an allotment from the Federal Emergency Care Act funds that's called GEAR funds. And California was allotted $355 million. So we did some calculations and tried to figure out how could we draw a small circle around those students who are the most vulnerable to not continuing if they don't get some support. And so that was the competitive Cal Grant B Access Awards. So we're recommending that we supplement that existing award with $500, and that they get that one time for this upcoming academic year, and that that be, you know, a small demonstration of commitment to trying to help students who probably don't have a lot of places to turn. So we'll be working on that, joining with partners. I'm hoping that we work with our friends at the community colleges and others. We also recognize that the Federal CARES Act allocated its funds based on Pell Grant participation. Because community college students in California don't participation in the numbers that reflect the actual need on campuses, that methodology didn't exactly represent their need at the community colleges, so there's a lot of unmet need. So we think we can capture those students and very specifically CADA students or undocumented students. So we're hoping that we could, this is not the panacea solution. This is just a piece to try and target funds to those who may not have been effectively addressed through the federal emergency aid, and that perhaps we can tailor and get some aid and relief to them at the state level. And there are several other things that we're doing, but I think that I'll stop there and just say that we really want to work with you. I mean, I'm a believer that those who are closest to the problem are closest to the solution. So we really need to hear from you and really have this be a collaborative effort as we speak for helping that next generation stay in college and become part of that renewed workforce that is eventually going to get us out of this dark period. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much, Marlene. I really appreciate the information you shared, and also just motivation that you're relaying out to all of us here on this call, especially also around the longer view and re-envisioning what California is going to look like after, and for the insight around the 3 orders that y'all are working on and ensuring that students that didn't receive federal aid can get some more support around pockets here in California where it may be available. And with that, I'd love to just give one final shout out to some other folks online before we move into Q&A. Thank you, Michael, for flagging that we have some CSU trustees on the line. Trustee Fong, Trustee Kimball, Trustee Kames, Sebelius, Trustee Furstenberg, and Trustee Morales. Thank you so much for joining us. And I'd like to thank our California Higher Education partners, PPIC, the Campaign for College Opportunity, at Trust West, and California Competes for joining us as well, along with Cal Matters. I appreciate y'all being on the line. And I would like to also thank the College Futures Foundation for joining us, especially with the shout out given of all the work to give aid to students right now. And without any other further comments, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Rigel, who is going to lead us in a Q&A.
Thank you, everyone. I'm just going to jump in. So Kelly Washington asked what information students have received from their institutions regarding the CARES emergency aid. So just wanted to first pass it over to the panelists. What have you heard, and maybe from institutions, what have you heard about the CARES aid coming? How much is going to students? How will it be distributed, etc.? If any of the students, you just want to unmute yourselves and you could begin to answer if you have an answer.
Yeah, I could start this one off, and I think that's a great question. Nothing. But I think the conversations are just starting to happen. I did hear that the campus presidents just met about it, I think near the end of last week. The chancellor actually reached out to CSSA this morning asking for a meeting to discuss it. So I think the conversations are just now starting to happen, but general student body has heard zero.
Yeah, on that note, Politico actually released an article just today with the headline being less than 1% of federal emergency cash for college students doled out. And that's kind of been reflected in our experiences as well. There's just not too much word as to how much of this money has actually reached the pockets of students.
And same thing with UC. We've heard that the funds have been distributed down to the campuses, and campuses have broad discretion on how to allocate that funding. So we're in constant communication with our student leaders on each campus, figuring out exactly how that aid will be dispersed, given that it'll probably look different on each of the different UC campuses, but those conversations are ongoing, and we hope to have more information on that soon. And even more importantly, have money in students' pockets even quicker.
On a related note, Lauren Asher asked if there's any tracking of how public colleges in total or by the system, by the segment, are going to be completing applications and spending care funds. I don't know, Lande, if you'd like to take this, or if anyone has a sense of any kind of tracking for those dollars.
Tracking of the GEAR dollars?
Of the care funds, the federal care funds.
Yeah, that's a good question, Lauren. Part of the challenge is that the funds have been dispersed at the campus level, so they are not going through any of the system offices. So we would have to go through campus by campus to try and figure out how exactly to capture what the spending has been, and also come up with some shared categories in terms of how we want to categorize the allocation of those dollars. My understanding of the CARES funds, and you all probably know this as well, is that 50% of the dollars that went to the campus level are intended for student and student grants. So it is emergency aid for students. I don't know what the holdup is in terms of making sure that those dollars then get turned around to students, but I can certainly investigate that a little bit myself.
Thanks so much. We are coming up closely on the 2:30 mark, but we have a lot of great questions. And so we just really want to thank everyone who's been on, and encourage, if you're able to stay on just a few more minutes, we do have several other really great questions. So Diana Ratsami asked if, and this is to the students, I think would be best positioned, are there any colleges or districts or universities that have taken action in response to prevent race and xenophobia, hate crimes and discrimination against the Asian Pacific Islander communities? And they asked because there was recently an anti-Asian incident in San Diego State. So I'm curious if you students have heard of actions being taken by colleges and universities.
I'll start on this one. I'm a student at San Diego State, and I'm familiar with what happened, but there really hasn't been much. Other than making sure that Zoom calls have the security that are needed, password protected, those sort of things, that doesn't happen again. But in terms of the xenophobia, I believe that there was, maybe some things on social media, but not anything super concrete.
Does any other student want to jump in?
Yeah, I know. I mean, the statistics are obvious that xenophobia and hate crimes are on the rise against API populations all throughout California and all throughout the United States. But we haven't seen a very firm, response from our institutions to that yet.
On the community organizing side or the student organization side, I've seen people post on social media ways to kind of fight back, and I've seen organizations elaborate or draft statements to deliver to administration, and also students taking the lead on creating works of art to, in a way, stay remotely empowered and protect the Asian, the Pacific Islander, and just the Asian community in general. So maybe that's a way that community organizing is also helping cope with this.
Great. We have Rochelle Saar about, she's a student at Sac State, and was just taking some classes at Bakersfield City College this semester, and as a result hasn't been able to receive the emergency grant funding from Sac State during this semester. And so she was pointing out that there are some inequities, that some CSU campuses and perhaps UC campuses have funds able to give to students that community college students do not have access to. Amine, Gloria, Bryan, I'm wondering if any of you could speak to that.
I mean, one of the great things about this call is that you get to hear from two fantastic community college leaders and myself. So I think Bryan touched on it. Gloria, when she said that what's happening right now is every day of our lives, and Bryan, when he pointed out that all these same issues of basic needs, housing insecurity, mental health insecurity, lack of communication with the students, lack of institutions being responsive, lack of guidance for our most vulnerable populations, this is our everyday lives. This is what is already happening. This is just exacerbated what is already existing, which is why when life returns to normal, we can't go back to that normal, and we need to continue to invest, need to continue to educate, and continue to create pathways and guidelines for our most vulnerable students.
And just to echo what you said, it's also very important for us to like continue thinking about the ways to maintain the resources that we have constructed due to this. If that's like expanding on remote learning, if that's providing more financial aid or more resources for food security to students that are in need. This is the work that we should be paying attention to. Like, how can we pave the way for this to continue and to be institutionalized, I guess.
I'm wondering, Bryan, are you trying to speak?
Yeah.
Go for it.
Yes. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, I've been trying to unmute. But just to reiterate and add on to what Gloria and Amine have said, we've really been seeing that, you know, there's been reluctancy to move towards online learning or distance learning before this crisis, and now we're seeing that there's still a bit of reluctancy throughout our teaching faculty, and just by virtue of necessity, we're seeing that innovation is occurring, and hopefully we can, just as Gloria said, preserve this innovation and ensure that students are able to access resources remotely if need be. Of course, just as Amine said, we cannot go back to the normal that we were facing before this crisis, because that was not serving all of our students properly. And so as we move forward, we need to build better and not build back.
Thank you so much, Bryan. I would love to ask all these questions. I just want to make a few points that folks have raised. So one person asked about advocates for students with disabilities. So if folks have ideas there, please feel free to put them into the Q&A and we can circulate that later. Another person really uplifted the importance of the census at this time, particularly for our undocumented students to be counted. And finally, another student from SMAC, Mace, brought up there's a real issue with on-campus versus off-campus housing right now, that some colleges have it open and some do not, and that this can impact a lot of student decision making. The community college students wanting to transfer, figuring out where are they going to be able to have housing or not. And at CCSF, free.
I think we lost Rigel for a sec. Thank you so much, Rigel, for raising those themes as well and tying it all back together. I'll just take it from here since we are out of time, folks. I want to remind everyone that we have recorded this webinar, and we also will be distributing out this as well as Q&A, so folks can get their questions answered. And I just again really want to give a huge thank you to everyone for joining us today, the student panelists, our incredible policymakers, everyone in the audience. May this be the beginning of the conversation, the ongoing conversation, and not the end. We hope that y'all were able to really truly listen to students, and just you being here shows that. And if you'd like to get connected with any of the student panelists, please feel free to reach out to me, Karina Paredes, kparedes@publicadvocates.org, or any of my colleagues. We really want to keep pushing for everyone to uplift the student voices during these extraordinary times, whether it's the classroom, department, college level, segment, state level. Students care about how all these spaces are doing well or not doing well for them. And we know it is something unprecedented, and reminding that common humanity is really important right now as well. But we invite you all to partner directly with the leaders you heard from today and reach out to me again for anyone that you'd like to be connected with. And on a personal note, I hope each and every one of you stay well. We need each and every one of you on this call to stay well during these times. So deep breaths, self-care. We're here for the good fight, right? Especially now in this moment. So let's continue forth together, and just want to end up the collective breath as one. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Karina and Public Advocates, for putting this together. Take care.
Thanks everybody for hopping on, and all the work that you guys are all doing within your local organizations, and also to these fantastic student leaders for doing a great job of speaking to the issues.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone. Goodbye.
Thanks.